My word, Tom. Never in the history of our channel has there been demand for a sequel such as this. What's that? Khal Drogo? Never heard of the guy. Anyway, let's deliver what we promised and talk about and rank the armies of Westeros. Before we start, usual yada yada yada, like, subscribe, algorithm, praise it, and our Discord and Patreon are linked in the description if that interests you. Got to keep the intro short for this one, because it's going to be a long one. Send the ravens, Tom, it's time to mobilize. The armies of Westeros are all very similar in the broad sense. Don't get me wrong, certain armies have unique aspects or specialized units, which we'll address, but in terms of technology and tactics, they're all pretty much singing from the 15th century medieval warfare playbook. Mounted knights and men-at-arms combined with infantry and archers, all wearing varying degrees of ringmail, gambeson, brigandines and the like, all the way up to full plate and employing siege engines where appropriate. So to help differentiate them, we're going to be considering equipment quality, numbers, power projection, logistics, and we're also going to take into account a bit of these armies' historical performances and reputations. I know that drags the commander's skill into the mix a little, but really, it's the only way we can do this without saying, these guys have the most troops, so they're at the top, which would be predictable and boring. The armies are also judged as if they were standing alone, no political allies or friends. But we will make an exception for sellswords if they are bought and paid for. Lastly, we're considering these armies at full mobilization. This just helps keep things clean. We know the bigger armies could just muster what they need instead of the full force, but adding in that variable, it just starts to make things messy. Yes, tick-tock motherfucker, I hear you, Tom. Once again, form the battle lines! And let's get ranking. Kicking things off at number 9, we've got the Army of the Crownlands. Despite being at the bottom, I'm actually going to take a moment to defend this army a little here. Yes, it's small, and yes, it really doesn't have much of a chance of defeating the other regions in a pitched battle. But for their intended purpose, this is actually a top-quality force. Taking their inspirations from the more pompous aspects of medieval Europe, they've got a strong warfighting navy in the Royal Fleet, which is great for repelling foreign invaders at sea, and due to the region's prosperity, it stands to reason they are well equipped. But at 15,000 strong, this is the smallest army of the bunch, and absolutely fucked if it tried to go on the offense in the larger regions. But that's really not the point of this force. This army's sole intention is to function as a bodyguard army for the king, and in that regard, it's actually more than adequate. Especially when you consider what makes this army strong. It's not expected to fight alone. The only thing this force actually has to do is protect the king long enough for reinforcement vassals to arrive. In this regard, its numbers are more than acceptable. With the defender's natural advantage, any army attacking this force ideally needs a 3-to-1 numbers advantage. So, to keep it simple, at full strength for 15k, any army that wants to come and take on the Crownlands actually needs roughly 45,000 men to have sure odds of overcoming it. In that regard, suddenly, they don't seem too shabby, eh? As for what makes this army weak, it's green and it's confined. The capital is seldom attacked, and when it is, it's usually through sieging the city rather than open battle. The small size and general prosperity of the Crownlands also means little in the way of raiders and enemies for the men of this army to cut their teeth on. This leads to, with the exception of the elite warriors in the capital, like the King's Guard of course, a rather green and inexperienced army overall that's used to the good life and hasn't seen too many winters, so to speak. As such, you're unlikely to see many tough and battle-hardened warriors in the rank and file like you can expect with other regions. On top of this, due to the numbers, the army is confined to the position of a defending army. Even with the Royal Fleet for transport and power projection, due to the manpower numbers, I cannot see these guys doing well on the offensive anywhere, and that's even before thinking of marching them up to cold, frozen death traps like the North and the Vale. To sum it up, it's good and fine where it is, but not much more. At spot number 8, we've got... Come on, guys, you all knew they were going to be way down here. It's the Ironborn. We covered these guys extensively in the other video, so cliff notes. Norse/Viking inspired aesthetics, 20,000 strong, 300 warships, amazing at maritime and hit-and-run warfare, but lack discipline, don't sport the best equipment, and their doctrine makes them bad at open field and pitched battles, and they suck on the defensive. The reason we've got them one notch higher than the Crownlands is, despite my unyielding and unflinching personally biased hatred of these guys, they do admittedly have better displays of power projection than the Crownlands, at least militarily speaking, of course. You've also got the glory days of Harwin Hardhand, the only Ironborn I remotely respect to consider, who actually made these guys a massively dominant force in days gone by. If they weren't such standoffish shitheads and had the capacity to make buddies with another kingdom, they become the tide-turning, super awesome, happy, fun-time support force for any other kingdom. But on their own, they have been, throughout most of their history, the equivalent of a flea bite. Fuck the Ironborn! That is all. At number 7, it's those sneaky snakes, the Dornish. The military forces of Dorne are a bit of a funny one. On their home turf, they are pretty much completely fucking invincible, not even dragons can budge them. But when they dip their toe into another region, the result is they often get creamed relatively decisively too. Taking their aesthetic inspirations from medieval Spain and Middle Eastern cultures, and some historical inspirations from Wales, the forces of Dorne are one of the more mysterious armies in their numbers, with the only confirmed aspect of their military being they have no naval power. George has stated the Dornish have strength comparable with the North and the Vale. With that last statement, we can infer that these dynamic, daring, desert-defending deceptives can field anything from 35 to 45,000 men. Though they are renowned for the high quality of their spearmen, that is not their greatest strength, as that honor belongs to their unorthodox warfare. The greatest Dornish victories have been defensive actions achieved with guerrilla warfare and insurgency. This is a force that, like the Rangers of the Watch, will strike from out of nowhere and become part of the sand and rocks before you even know what hit you. It is in fact these very tactics that have made Dorne the only region in Westeros that can claim to have successfully defeated armies with fully grown dragons in them, even killing one via a well-placed scorpion bolt. Even if you think you've pacified them, know that you haven't broken them, and rebellion is likely soon to follow, as a certain Targaryen had to find out the hard way. Whether they are salty, sandy, or stony, House Martell's motto, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, best house words ever, #change my mind, are words most fitting for the armies of this region. So, if they are unbreakable, where are they weak? Power projection. How do we beat these sneaky fuckers, Tom? Simply develop a dislike of the sand and rocks they inhabit, and ignore them. The reason the Dornish are so accepting of polygamy is because they sucked at playing away from home. Everything the Dornish armies do really well, they can only do with a home field advantage. Their equipment and tactics have been developed specifically with the Dornish terrain and climate in mind. Guerrilla warfare and insurgency are only effective tactics if said insurgents and guerrillas are intimately familiar with the terrain and workings of the small folk around them. Without those elements, these tactics just simply don't work. Due to the Dornish heat, most forces also don't wear much in the way of plate armor, opting for lighter protective apparel that provides better heat management. And their cavalry, while being the fastest and most agile around, is quite fragile due to their horses' inability to wear armor altogether. This is absolutely fine in the Dornish climate, where plate armor would be massively uncomfortable to be encased in, and brings a very real danger of exacerbating dehydration and heat stroke, and heavily armored horses might struggle on the sand, but anywhere else in Westeros, they are at a painful equipment disadvantage. Like the Crownlands, this is a great army where it is, but not much more. And despite their stellar defensive track record, they are let down by their offensive success too much to climb any higher. Know that it pained me to put them down here, because as you all know, when I'm not simping for Stannis, I'm simping for Oberyn. But it is what it is. Moving on. At number 6, we've got the thunderous forces of the Stormlands. What? The home region of the Manus in the bottom half? A UFO has clearly abducted Liam and replaced him with a non-Manus simping clone, my green side tells me you're thinking. But no, I'm genuinely just making an effort to be fair and balanced here. While the Stormlands are immensely formidable, and like the Ironborn in days gone by, being the big dogs in the yard with the era of the Storm Kings, I do think the higher picks have stronger cases that beat them out in the current day.
Which is exactly what a non-Manus simping clone would say.
That being said, with this region, we've taken our first step into the armies that really mean business. Inspired by a mix of medieval Germany and England, the armies of the Stormlands are our first regional army that are actually reputed for their fighting ability. The men of the Stormlands are known for being physically strong, tough, and stubborn as fuck. And their being the first true line of defense against those pesky Dornish snakes has instilled in them strong martial traditions. A fairly prosperous region, able to raise about 30,000 well-equipped men, they are on the smaller side of regional armies, but as a counterweight to the reach, Stormmen are all about quality over quantity. Especially when you consider what makes them so frustratingly formidable. Which is... They are the land that birthed Bobby B, Brienne, and the Menace! Instant plus 10 Chadness and Chad S buff. But in seriousness, while they are known for the high quality of their infantry, they are renowned nationwide for their archers. While the named heroic characters of the Stormlands, like Stannis, Brienne, and Bobby, are famed for their skills in command, swordsmanship, and hammer smash, respectively, the real driving force of the Stormlands' deadliness overall is their appreciation of the longbow, and their reputation for producing the best archers in Westeros, particularly those who hail from the Marchers. In our real-world history, the ability of these two tiny little chunks of this damp, tiny, shithole little island, I live here, don't tell me that description is inaccurate, being able to face down, and in many cases defeat, the medieval military juggernaut that was what we now call the French, can be attributed in no small part to this piece of wood with some string on it. Longbows and their arrows don't pierce plate armor, despite the Hollywood misconception. Well, they can, but when they do, it's nothing less than a fluke, not a consistent property. Caught you, that guy. But when fired in enough volume at the correct distances, they will usually yield two outcomes. 1, they find their way into armor gaps or a vital part of a knight's warhorse, or 2, the arrows shatter upon impact with the plate and send big, sharp splinters flying into the unfortunate knight's neck or into the visor of their helmet. Both outcomes, of course, causing untold havoc and chaos within the ranks of what was supposed to be a battle-ending cavalry charge. This is very likely why the Stormlands have been able to give the Reach a good thrashing in past conflicts despite lesser numbers. It's no good having amazing cavalry if it can't charge the enemy without getting shot to pieces. Knock, draw, and parry this, you filthy flowers! As for where the Stormlands are weak, it's exceptionally difficult for them to maintain a standing navy. Contrary to popular belief, the Stormlands can and have raised military fleets in days gone by, and are capable of building a fleet with the region's general wealth and resources. But it's just not practical for them to do so with long-term viability in mind. The issue is their homeland, and there's a hint in the name. A large swath of the Stormlands' coastal waters is titled Shipbreaker Bay. Would you like 3 guesses as to why? It's actually a pretty great natural defensive feature of the region, making naval invasion very dicey for enemies. Because calm, sapphire blue waters 1 minute, fleet destroying maelstrom without warning the next. If it were you, would you really want to flip that coin? But unfortunately, the sword cuts both ways. This doesn't mean the Stormlands are incapable of good power projection. Their history shows us they have no issues mobilizing, marching, and fighting their way into and conquering other regions, but without a big navy, it always means doing it the hard way, along with usually letting your enemy know the direction you're coming from. Still, the army may be small, it may not have boats, but don't underestimate it, for it brings the fury.
Love you, Menace.
At number 5... Ooh, it's time for the first round of bitching down in the comments, Tom. It's the Army of the Reach.
But it's the largest, most platiest, most horsies!
Is probably what you'll read in defense of the Reach. And yeah, all these things are actually true. They're region-inspired by a mix of medieval Italy and France. The Reach sounds incredibly formidable on paper. 80 to 100,000 strong, and coming from such a wealthy region, they are well-equipped and well-supplied. On top of that, you've got amazing power projection capabilities in the Reach's grain prosperity to ensure abundant supply lines, and also the Red Wine Fleet, which can boast a warfighting navy of 200 warships. Not to mention the other 1,100 merchant and fishing vessels that could be Dunkirked at an opposing navy if things really did get desperate. The Reach can bring the most plate-armored cavalry to bear, and this is an advantage not to be sneezed at. Heavy cavalry, when employed correctly, can be utterly devastating. Like, battle-ending levels of devastating. Especially in open field battles with room for flanking maneuvers. In the right circumstances, it can even be the deciding factor of a battle. A great in-world example being the Battle of the Green Fork. This edge is even more pronounced if the armies of the Reach are on the defensive in their home region, as it's basically big, flat, dry, open fields, ideal for cavalry to fight on. This advantage is bolstered even further when you factor in the Reach as the region with the most plate armor knocking around, and in open battle medieval warfare, providing of course the weather isn't on either end of the extreme, plate is king. But enough praising. Let's commence the slagging off. Where are the Reach weak? They're all pomp and no chomp, or if you prefer the more common phrase, all the gear but no idea, on top of logistics and internal division. When you dig a little deeper into their martial mentality and historical performance, and the factors not often considered with a medieval army in fantasy because, well, they are the boring bits, you start to run into reasons to drag the Reach down. That's right, let's discuss logistics. 100,000 men is a lot of men. It's a lot of men to move from one place to another. It's a lot of men to coordinate when in battle. It's an awful lot of mouths to feed and water. And perhaps most concerning of all, it's an awful lot of bodies you've got to hope are fit, healthy, and free of contagious diseases, as this is actually what fucks over a medieval army outside of battle. This is fine when you're on the defensive in the Reach itself and you've got supplies aplenty, but when you start making your way into regions like the North and Dorne, those massive numbers actually hinder more than they help and make the army completely dependent on supply lines. One broken supply line too many, combined with the majority's rather romanticized view of war, and this army would starve and probably mutiny quicker than any other. But wait, we're not done here. The Reach also just kind of have a pretty crappy track record in war, and they're very fragmented. They've been pasted more times than they themselves have done the pasting, and due to the sheer size of the region and number of them, the noble houses don't tend to get along with each other all that well, which causes a lot of division and internal conflict from within, resulting in fractured unity, which actually makes mustering that 100k force under a single objective difficult, even without the already present logistical impediments. And we're still not done. On top of this, nowhere else is knighthood as coveted and held in high regard as it is in the Reach. Combined with the immense population, this results in a lot of knights knocking around. But it's firmly a case of quantity over quality. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, give me a single Vale Knight over 10 Reach Knights any day of the fucking week. The Knights of the Reach are very big on the pageantry of knighthood. The status, the tourneys, their code of chivalry and honor. But because of the prosperous and relatively peaceful region of which they hail from, which, let's be fair, is the closest thing to a true paradise you'll find in Westeros, the forces of the Reach don't often bloody their nose in the real world, besides the occasional border scrap with the Dornish in the mountains. With the odd exceptions like Randall, Baldy, Badass, Tarly, and Loras and Garland Tyrell, the Reach's army could be best categorized as fair weather warriors. Well-trained and highly effective in formal settings like tournaments, but too much of the good life leaves most of them unprepared for the true harshness and horrors of war. But before we wrap up, I do want to point out that, realistically, with no fantasy lens, the Reach should for all intents and purposes be the most powerful region in Westeros when it comes to both military and politics. But they seem to have fallen into the trap of being that one region that George artificially nerfs or amps to whatever level the plot needs them to be, and they never get that heroic glory many other regions have had. Boo, George! Boo! Give the roses their due! Hey, that right, Tom! Next up at number 4, we have those river-dwelling rascals that form the army of the Riverlands. Standing at roughly 45,000 strong and inspired by... well, I don't actually know, to be honest. I've heard good cases for symmetry with the south of medieval England, the Netherlands, or Poland. The Riverlands is the solid all-rounder when it comes to land-based warfare. Like the Stormlands, the Riverlands are famed for their hardy warriors and fighting prowess, though unlike the Stormlands, Reach and Dorne, they are not noted for an exceptional unit type. Rather, they are just good at fighting war in general. This makes a lot of sense and probably has a lot to do with the fact they've had to fight practically everyone at one point or another, and have thus needed to be capable of going head-to-head with a variety of warfare styles. For these guys, versatility isn't a luxury, it's a goddamn must. They're basically that one kid who was picked on throughout the entirety of their school years, but instead of accepting it as their lot in life, they got in the gym, bulked up, studied MMA, and became that guy at the bar you instinctively know not to fuck with. They do lack naval power, but unlike the other regions, they get a pass since they are the central kingdom with sod all coastline that would warrant or justify a large naval force. The Malisters have strength enough to defend Seaguard, and that's all this region really needs. Their power projection is also pretty good since they border quite literally every single region apart from Dorne, so attacking their foes is a simple case of marching across the border. But of course, vice versa, they piss off enough neighbors But this encirclement by almost every other region does feed into their ace card, which is... experience. When your region is the most frequently chosen playground for all the other kingdoms to have their spats, it's fair to say you will have the most overall experience in fighting wars, and this is indeed the honor we can bestow upon the armies of the Riverlands. No matter what they do, they always get dragged into a conflict one way or another, and quite often they are the priority faction to win over or take out due to their fighting prowess and the strategic importance of their kingdom's location. Through centuries upon centuries of persistent conflicts with everyone on all sides, this has imparted the army of the Riverlands with an adapt or die approach. To you, it was the war that determined your house's fate and your legacy. To the Riverlands, it was third day of third moon. And before you come from under your bridge to say, that's not the quote, they don't have days of the week in Westeros, so I can't say it was Tuesday, that guy. As for their weak spots, they are incredibly divided amongst themselves. You think it's bad in the Reach? Those pompous, flower-loving dandies have nothing on these petty bitches. The Bracken and Blackwood feud is probably the most famous, along with the phrase tardiness and animosity towards everyone, and well, none of the Riverlords are particularly fond of one another, and thus it's very hard to get them unified under a single banner. This is shown in the world's history with how rare it is to see the Riverlands actually mustering larger armies. It can be done once in a blue moon, but it generally takes a special type of strong arming. If they are all agreed they hate you more than they hate each other, you'd better be prepared for 7 hells of a scrap. But if not, just stand back and let them take care of each other. Hey, Tully! I heard Lord Frey call your mum a slag the other day. That should do it. Onwards. At number 3, it's the valiant vanquishing veterans of the Vale, spearheaded by the oh-so-legendary Knights of the Vale. When your martial traditions and doctrines produce 2 of the finest battle commanders in recent times, and one of those commanders is also at least in the conversation for the greatest warrior alive during his prime, you clearly know a thing or two about war. And we're not done there. When the fucking Manus is stating you have the best knights of all the 7 kingdoms, you know these guys aren't playing around. The Vale gets to boast this claim for all to hear. At roughly 45,000 strong, this Wales and Swiss-inspired region has an army that the other regions are just grateful likes to keep to themselves as much as possible and stay out of wider conflicts when they can. Though it's never given much attention, the Vale do in fact have a military naval fleet, though it's unknown how big or formidable it is, only that it has seen battle and it is still intact, so it must be a decent size and quality. And just why are these guys so legendarily lethal? Their teeth are always bleeding. These guys aren't earning their reputations by play fighting with one another in tourneys like those delicate flowers in the Reach. They're always testing their mettle with the real thing. The Knights of the Vale and their men-at-arms are locked in a constant war with the Vale mounting clans whom they fight on a very regular basis. Because of this, practically every knight in the Vale, that is still alive at least, has the majority of their experience come from actual battle. There's no ceremony, rules, or ideal circumstances for these guys, and even the terrain of the Vale itself makes things like mounted combat difficult. Yet, the forces of the Vale have learned to thrive in this adversity and operate unhindered. Sorry, Tarly, but uneven ground isn't going to give you an edge against these guys. Now, I don't want to downplay the value of tourney experience and sparring. It is valuable and it does impart and hone fighting skills since you can learn from your mistakes, but there's important lessons you can only learn from the real thing. With regular exposure to the heat of battle when blood is being spilled and one wrong move could mean the end of your life, you develop a certain mentality of ending things quickly and efficiently, if you want to live at any rate. And this is why the Vale's forces deserve to be up here. They've always got blood on their swords, and like the Riverlands, experience the true horrors of war more frequently than many other regions. As for where the Vale's forces are weak, their commanders are too internally focused and cautious. Unlike the Riverlands and the Reach, where the lords are bitching amongst themselves because of animosity towards one another, the Jedi Council from KOTOR 2, I mean the Lords of the Vale, are constantly bitching amongst themselves on whether or not it's worth getting involved in external conflicts altogether. This does make a lot of sense, since the Vale are one of the more isolated kingdoms due to the harsh mountains that encapsulate them. It tracks they would be pretty isolationist. But this does lead to them focusing on internal issues rather than the wider scope of Westerosi politics. It also doesn't help that they are next to fucking impossible to invade due to their natural border defenses, meaning their army only comes out to play if they want it to, and this promotes an overly cautious mindset. All in all, what we're trying to say, and the primary reason they haven't taken the spot above them, they have this amazing army of high-quality troops, but fuck me, it's a massive pain in the arse to get the green light to mobilize it. And by then, the cause they may have wished to take up might have already had its fate decided.
So you will do nothing? Apathy is death.
It sure is, my lady. And in the number 2 spot, which if things were fair would be the number 1 spot, it's the war-wise warriors of the Westerlands and the fucking North. They're hanging in the same spot because they share a joint strength, but both have vastly different cases for why they should be all the way up here. One's great on paper and in practice, the other not so much on paper, but it has irrefutable results behind it. So let's have a look-see. On paper, the French-inspired Lannister army is absolutely fucking fantastic. 50,000 is about as big as you want a medieval-type army getting before the logistics get out of hand and start to become a burden. It's exceptionally well-equipped and well-trained, all the way down to the common foot soldiers thanks to the region's vast wealth. And while it isn't the biggest, the Westerlands have a cracking navy of 50 to 60 warships. While this is one of the smaller fleets, it's key to note it's likely to have much higher quality ships pound for pound than the other navies. Think a fleet of Star Destroyers, not the local bulk cruisers, the big Carillion ships. In practice, the Westerlands also show us they mean business, as they can muster, mobilize, and coordinate large forces very quickly, very efficiently, and very effectively. They may not have the best troops pound for pound, or have a specialized elite unit. They may not be the most numerous army, but the Westerlands are a well-oiled machine of military might, which might have something to do with their greatest strength, which is not getting covered at this moment because this is a joint pick. Now, I'm going to be honest here. If we were to scratch that fantasy coat of paint away and look at this realistically, the north should be where the reach is, and the reach should be up here. The north lacks any naval power besides a couple of coastal patrol vessels. It's one of the poorest regions in regards to general prosperity, and thus probably one of the worst equipped, with a notable lack of plate armor in comparison to other forces, and to top it off, it has the most challenging logistical issues of any army on here. But the Northerners don't give a single flying fuck, because their track record speaks for itself. Both at home on the defensive and away on the attack. They are the only region to beat back the Andals, they are perpetually repelling the wildlings, and in nearly every instance a major conflict in Westeros has been decided through performance on the battlefield. The side that had the north was more often than not the victor. Coincidence? Methinks not. At the end of the day, it took dragons to make these guys submit. Nothing else would cut it. With Anglo-Saxon and Highlander aesthetics at 45,000 strong, the Scottish and Yorkshire-inspired northern forces are known to be, pound for pound, man for man, the fiercest warriors in all the Seven Kingdoms. It's been said that one Northerner equals 10 Southerners, and while this quote does come from a rather biased source, there does seem to be a small amount of truth in it. With much stronger First Men ancestry than those Ponce Southern twats, Northmen tend to be bigger, stronger, and more physically resilient on the whole than those with stronger ancestral ties to the Andals. And that's before factoring in the environmental factors of their homeland that toughen them up, like the climate, the scarcity of resources, and the consistent scuffs with the wildling forces that make it over the wall. Bottom line, don't fuck with an Northerner unless you want to be bear-hugged to death. Anyway, before we do the individual strengths and weaknesses, let's address this joint strength that's got them so high and above even the Vale. And that joint strength is total regional unity. When the wardens of these regions call their banners, everyone, and I mean everyone, answers the call. Whether it's rebellion or a call to defend the king, the lords, even the ones who aren't fond of their warden, raise their banners without question and follow their liege loyally into battle at the drop of a hat. It's for different reasons, of course. The Westerlands' loyalty is bound through fear, and the North's is sealed with honor, but it matters not. Point is, both get the same job done, and this is honestly what I think puts them above every other regional army. As Bobby says, which is the bigger number? 5 or 1? One army. A real army united behind one leader with one purpose. That's basically what you have with both the armies of the North and the Westerlands. Now let's take a look at the Westerlands' greatest strength, and that is consistently good commanders on the field. The Westerlands have incredibly well-trained and equipped troops, but where they really shine is the field generals who coordinate them. The The Westerlands are known for producing great strategists and tacticians, and this is not just the case with Tywin. Even the Westerlands commanders of the past have shown with their actions they understand the game of war, but it's field performance where we see them shine, generally making smart decisions when it comes to the battle itself, keeping their men in line and well-disciplined and coordinated. It's probably also worth mentioning, this region, thanks to its gold wealth, is the only region that can quite literally drown you in sellsword blood before their own knights and men-at-arms even have to get stuck in. Gold can't buy you love, but it sure can buy you attrition. However, while they conduct themselves exceptionally well in war, the armies of the Westerlands do have a weakness that has persisted throughout their history, and that weakness is too fucking conventional. The army of the Westerlands is the second largest in Westeros. As such, it's used to being able to win the day with conventional warfare and brute force. However, when faced with a commander with some cunning behind them, they very often come up short. Obviously, Robb's plays against Tywin are the most well known here, but again, this isn't just the case for Tywin. Looking further back in history, like the Dance of the Dragons for instance, the Westerlands armies only really fail when the other side's commander has said, "Fuck it," and done something exceptionally bold or crafty. Which leads us perfectly to our northern friends. What is their biggest boon? They know how to make do with little and make you do without. The North itself hones its people into great warriors just by virtue of the environment. The North is cold, barren, and extremely oppressive. As such, it molds its people into tough and resilient individuals who stand together, don't complain, and just get on with it. This is an army that can be starving and tired, but still find the grit to carry on fighting. An army that can live off the land, even if there's hardly anything in it. An army so loyal that you'd have to make some beyond exceptionally stupid choices to cause it to mutiny. Hey Rob. If it wasn't for the Unsullied, I would posit that of all the armies in the series, the North would be the most difficult to break on the morale front. On the other side of the coin, they know not everyone is as tough as them, and thus know how to cause weaker-willed armies to break, using that famous tactic of salty fuckery known as Scorched Earth. Fighting them in battle isn't actually the hardest part of facing the North. It's following after them. They'll make sure there isn't so much as a spud in the ground by the time they're through, and slowly but surely, they'll whittle your army down through starvation and desertion. Some might even say it's their way of letting you experience the joy of what it's like to live in the North. Eat your shoes, it'll be right. As for the weakness of these armored bears, it's not quick, but it is simple. It's mobilization time. As with the Dothraki in the last video, we will take a second to point out something that fucks with realism. And for the North, just like the Dothraki, it's their armor. Unlike those Horse Lord fucks, they do actually wear the stuff, but plate is very rare, and it's mostly ringmail and fur. Now, this does actually make a bit more sense than the Horse Lords, as plate does sap heat when you're somewhere very cold, so ringmail and fur can be a more practical choice when fighting in their homeland. But it can't be denied that anywhere else, besides Dorne of course, the Northerners are at an equipment disadvantage that should really detriment their effectiveness significantly. But it doesn't, because they're fucking Northmen, invulnerable to all forms of attack, so long as they've had a cup of tea. Disregarding this with the fantasy lens, however, the Northerners' main weakness is simply their ability to mobilize their full strength in anything resembling good time. This is actually a detriment caused by the region itself more than any factor to do with the army, but it does affect the army, so like the Stormlands, I think it still counts. Despite Northern Lords answering their Warden's call immediately, it still takes the absolute piss for them to muster into a fully mobilized army due to the sparse population and traveling the sheer distance required to buddy up. It took Robb 2 whole months to get just under half the North ready to march. Full mobilization likely meant waiting another couple of months. This is actually not too bad by real-world medieval standards, but by Westeros standards, it's painfully slow. It costs time, and sometimes it's time the North just doesn't have. But still, Robbed doesn't even begin to describe how I feel about the placement of these two. On my honor, the lions and the wolves will have their vengeance when that horse lord comes knocking. And finally, we've reached our number one pick, and you know what it is, because it's the only one left. It's Dany's army. The show version anyway, as we don't know what elements of this army will make it to Westeros from the books, or if Dany herself will ever get there at this rate. George, I am begging you, release the book. Anyway, wait, Tom, shh, listen.
What a load of crap! Wow, that's such a cheap placement!
Okay, guys, stop. At the end of the day, this woman can field 3 fucking dragons. Beasts that, when backed by an army, the other regions simply don't have an answer for. Well, Dorne, but only on their home turf. With that alone, she'd be number 1, with even the Ironborn being commanded by Balon as her sole supporting force. Yes, those beasts are that much of a game changer. Without the dragons, Daenerys' army would probably place somewhere in the middle. She's got a defensive powerhouse in her 8 to 15,000 Unsullied, and an offensive juggernaut in her 60,000 plus Dothraki horde, so both bases are covered. We're not counting the Ironborn, Dorne or Highgarden, because as stipulated at the beginning, they're allies, not her actual army. But those flame-spitting death lizards skyrocket her to the top, and there's simply no way of budging her. She is essentially the world of Ice and Fire's sole nuclear power. Scorpions are great, and people are going to bring them up in the comments. But hitting a dragon mid-flight when it's on the attack is nothing short of luck. Not a reliable tactic. Unless, of course, you're one of these two plot-armored pricks. And what is Dany's army's greatest strength? Are you kidding me? Are your ears painted on? She has 3 fucking dragons. And the weakness in Dany's force? I'm actually going to make a serious suggestion here and put my chips on a true lack of cooperation. The issue Dany has got is that the 2 primary bulks of her forces have been raised and trained in 2 vastly different environments, with 2 vastly different cultures, which have instilled 2 vastly different military doctrines within them. This results in a lack of true synergy and would make it hard for the Dothraki and Unsullied to effectively fight together as a singular coordinated force. This isn't a massive problem, since both of these forces are simply there to function as a defensive or offensive tar pit, while the dragons do the real work, but subtract the dragons, they can fight in the same battle together, sure, but it would be like fighting 2 separate armies, as their modus operandis are so vastly different. Thus, a good commander might be able to go all Napoleon on their arses and pick them apart by hitting them separately with their hard counters, if they're smart about it. Get Rob on job, he'll sort it. Also, this army is woefully dependent on their queen. If she goes the way of Harold Godwinson, then you'll have to keep an eye, haha, get it guys?
This joke brought to you by Tom.
On how fast that army disperses. Run, you cockless bastards and horse lords, for I command the power of Mannis. Is it cheap to put her at the top? Absolutely. Both me and Tom agree it's not really fair, and it's basically down solely to winged, fire-breathing hacks. But objectively, how do you argue against it? And that's our take. I can't wait for the comments section of this one, Tom. I'm sure there'll be no bitching about how people's favorite regions didn't place where they wanted them to. With that said, if you made it this far, we hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching, guys.